My name is Radwan Ziadeh. I'm a Syrian human rights activist. I born and raised in Syria, in Damascus. I left Syria in 2007 as a senior fellow at U.S. Institute of Peace in Washington, D.C., where I wrote my first book in English about power and policy in Syria. And also, I am glad that I returned to Syria at the same day I left Syria, but after 5 years. I returned to Syria in September 2012, in the northern part of Syria, of course. All of these parts being liberated by the Free Syrian Army, and all the crossing borders with Turkey being liberated. It's too easy to cross the border. It was very emotional visit to visit your homeland after 5 years. At the same time, a lot of promising, but also a lot of challenges ahead of Syria. I admire the Syrian people. I think those, I never thought that there will be a revolution in my home country. I traveled almost in 80 countries around the world. I visited and studied the democratic transition in Latin America, in Eastern Europe, in Southeast Asia, in Africa. And I dreamed for one day there will be democratic transition in my home country in Syria. My family, it's just a middle class family. My father is a teacher. Then he became the manager of the school. But all my brothers, sisters also graduated from Damascus University. We can see that's a small family with the same time educated, a middle class. We have some difficulties for cost living being raising in Syria. Very limited opportunities of jobs, work, and all of that. My father decided to go to Saudi Arabia to work there, but he returned to Syria in the 90s. I grew up in Damascus. I graduated from Damascus University. This is a very interesting because I'm a dentist. I graduated from Faculty of Dentistry in Damascus University in 1999. After that, I continue my study as a surgeon. But I never been interested actually to work. This is why when I graduated, I never practiced dentistry at all. I became involved heavily in the human rights activities inside Syria. We established the first human rights organization in Syria in 2001 called the Syrian Human Rights Association. We are 40 lawyers, activists, human rights activists established the Human Rights Association, and it has full-time work for me, even that I'm working as a volunteer with this organization. 4 years later, I established my own organization called Damascus Center for Human Rights Studies. With this organization became the leading organization in international lobbying. Go to the New York, Geneva, the UN Human Rights Council, attending international events actually to raise awareness about the situation of human rights in Syria. Would that create more problems for me when I used to go back to Syria? At the same time, the best tragic story in my family that when I became as a human rights activist, active in politics in Syria, especially after Damascus Spring, I put all my family members at risk. It was my choice, and they have to pay, unfortunately, the price with such regime who can take the hostage of the whole family if you've been active in politics and human rights. When I left in Syria in 2007, the Assad regime, they put the travel ban on all my family members, my mother, sisters, brothers, and I cannot see them for almost 5 years. Because the travel ban, they cannot travel, and they cannot get back to Syria because the Assad regime, they issued an arrest warrant for me in February 2008. The most difficult story was my sister's story because her husband was in Saudi Arabia. He is physician working there, and she is in Syria, and she has 5 children, and all children, they don't see each other. they don't see their father, and now they're blaming their uncle of putting all family members' lives at risk. I was very sorry to them, and I think the Assad regime strategy in punishing not only the human rights activists but also their families. It was the dark side of all our life and the risk we take when we choose to work as human rights defenders.